Do not settle for the crumbs. You should have the whole cake, the icing, and the cherry on top too.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody. It is episode 22 of The Crumbs and I'm joined in the studio today by my co-host Alice. How are you, Caro?
I'm doing good on this fine Thursday. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It is great to have you in, but unfortunately for you, or fortunately, you are not the headline act today.
No, I'm not.
We've got a very, very special guest on the line.
I miss being in Vegas when I was the special one, but that's all right.
We'll provide context to our special guest in a minute about what that was. But we've got the very special Margot Foster online. Margot, how are you?
I'm very well, equally on this fine Thursday afternoon. Thank you, Simone.
It is so great to have you with us. We actually feel really privileged. It's not often we get an Olympian in our midst, particularly in our studio, even if it is on the screen. But for context, Alice, sports media student here at Holmes Glen, third year, she's just been in Vegas as part of a study abroad program for our high achieving students, and she's all Vegased out, I think. She's come back with a bit of a new perspective on sport and entertainment, Margot. So she's readjusting to Melbourne.
Not quite Vegas, yes,
Yeah,
get that.
the weather especially now, the cold.
Yeah, the weather's not great. But Margot, without further ado, I want to give you just a short intro and then I'm going to ask you to sort of tell us a bit more about yourself. But you are an Olympian. You are a member of the crew who won Australia's first Olympic women's rowing medal in the Coxed Fours. It was the 1984 LA Olympic Games.
Yes.
That in itself, we're going to come back to that in a minute. A member of a number of boards, so Chair of Sports Environment Alliance, Director and Vice President Motorsport Australia, a number of election committees, World Taekwondo, World Sailing, Water Polo Australia. You were the Vic Sport Chairwoman for a number of years and board member. The list goes on. This whole episode would be about your positions in sports governance and administration, I think. So we'll cap it and let you give us a bit more of a background. But before we do, I want to start off by asking you about that 1984 medal. It's been suggested by some that really marked the beginning of a new era for Australian women's sport. What are your memories of that time?
Well, they're fantastic memories, although they are some time ago now. But and I'm sure that my fellow crew members will have slightly different recollections and memories. But it was very exciting to be at the Olympic Games. And for me, it was sort of part of growing up because my father was a dual water polo Olympian. So I grew up knowing all about the Olympics and, thinking it was something that I might aspire to do in a very sort of quiet, low-key way. And I thought earlier on that I might get there as a swimmer, but that didn't come to pass. And so when I went to university, I was at one of the residential colleges at Melbourne Uni, got the opportunity to go rowing, said no, was asked again, said no, asked the third time and finally relented and went. So, and took it up. So within the space of sort of 6 years of taking up rowing, I was thrust into the Olympic environment with all the highs and lows that entails, including adjusting my work life because I was by then a practicing lawyer, and taking time out to travel, compete, live interstate for some of that training, and then, as we say, deal with the exigencies that arise when on site and in the pressure cooker that is an Olympic competition.
Amazing. I can't even imagine. So I want to hear about what happened. So you win this medal. At the time, I'm just making an assumption here that it was pretty low key. Like coming home, did you get sort of the accolades that you'd see these days? Like, tell me about the differences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we unlike now, everybody goes overseas and has lots of pre-Olympic competition. We didn't have any, so we were sort of training in a vacuum here, hoping that we would make the finals, hoping that we might get a medal, and. On the day, it was back in those days. It was a 1,000-metre race, so it was really a sprint, unlike now, which is a 2,000-metre race. So we finished the race, and we were told we'd come fourth. And so I know what extreme disappointment is like. But then the decision was reversed. And, well, in fact, the result was always clear, but the original officials had told us we'd come fourth and then reversed it, and we came third. So that made all the difference. And winning a medal in itself was, eaten a bit and probably beyond our expectations, although it was something we had hoped for. And there wasn't a lot of hoopla coming home. I stayed in the US for probably another month travelling around, so I missed whatever might have happened immediately upon return, but I'm not sure that there was much. There was an Olympians Club dinner later in 1984, so there was celebration there. But I guess it wasn't so much the public fanfare that was great. It was just the recognition and appreciation by all my friends and colleagues, people in the law that I didn't know. And it was just a fabulous thing to have done and to be recognised for, even in a less ostentatious way perhaps back then than is the case now. And I think there's quite a lot of change in the 70s and 1980s around women's sport. Not to say that women's sport hasn't been around forever, and we certainly know the cricket team has been represented since the 1930s, and certain other crews and other teams and whatever. But it just sort of began to have a bit of its own moment in the 70s and 80s. So rowing was admitted to the Olympic Games in 1976. Australia sent a crew in 1980, and so we were the second crew. The Los Angeles Olympics were also the first time that the women's marathon was held. And then early in the 1980s too, women, and I sort of compare this with the AFLW, but women were allowed to compete in surf life saving, and that had previously been verboten. So I sort of compare what happened with surf life saving to the enthusiasm with which women have taken up AFLW. So it's been a process. I'm not going to use the word journey, which is sort of overused. But part of the problem is this constant talking about women's sport as though it's reinvented by, the Matildas 2 years ago, or by, I can't think off the top of my head, but some other performance that says, women's sport is now on the map. It's always been there, and it's just been a question of its recognition and the embracing of it in more formal ways by national sport organisations and professional sport organisations as well.
That's a great insight.
Yeah.
Alice?
So as you mentioned before, you actually fitted in rowing around working as you had finished your law degree. First of all, can you just tell us why law what I guess drew you to that kind of area of work?
Well, I'm not very good at maths and science and things like that. So, just like I thought I might go to the Olympics as a swimmer, I thought maybe I'd be like my dad and be a doctor. But I didn't have those skills. I am a word person. I like writing. I like drafting. I like all those sorts of things. So law, I got the mark, so I got into it. I did it, and it served me very well for a long time. So, and it was also I also worked for myself almost from the beginning. So that flexibility also enabled me to spend the time rowing, both training, competing and travelling.
Yeah, and I guess following that, talk us through how law has, I guess, helped with your many roles in sport. Like, it's obviously probably played a part, the skills and stuff. Can you touch just a bit about that?
Oh, yeah. So, look, I feel as Simone mentioned, I've been on lots and lots of boards, still on quite a few boards and committees, and just the skills you learn as a lawyer are vital. Writing, reading, analysing information, seeing both sides of the a problem or a question, being creative, curious, all those sorts of skills. Probably some are inherent, others sort of honed by spending decades in the law. It's really vital skills, but it's interesting. They're not the only skills that people need on a board, but they've served me well to date, and I'm constantly trying to educate myself and update myself about the more modern things. And this morning, for example, I did a webinar on the challenges of AI in board land. So it's a constant learning curve to be good at governance and to bring my best self to the board roles that I do hold. But the law has been essential because it is always helpful for a board to have a lawyer on board as well as an accountant or finance person. Though having said that, we're not there to do our day jobs. We are there to bring the benefits of our skills and experience to the discussion around the table.
Margot, I just want to follow up. Your comments before I really liked hearing. Women's sport, it hasn't been reinvented, it's always been there. We had a guest on a few months ago who said something similar about women and ACLs. Women have always been doing ACLs, but now we've put a face and a name, and people are starting to realise and take notice, which is that's somewhat alarming. But talk to me about governance. So from a governance perspective, we have a subject here as part of our degrees, sport governance and leadership.
Yep.
You know, we hear the term governance thrown around a little bit like the word journey that you said earlier, but governance has always existed.
Yes.
Are there parts in time, particularly in a sporting landscape, that have made us start to really make sure we are highlighting and focusing on governance? And why has that become so important?
Well, governance is really, it's an overused word. It's probably one of those words that's not well understood, can be mean whatever to whomever in some circumstances. But basically it's about how you run your business. And it's not like a management meeting, sitting around a board table in a management sense. I always say governance, everybody is equal, everybody has one vote, no voice is better or more authoritative necessarily than any other. And I think sport was for a long time done on kitchen tables by volunteers, and that worked so well for a while, but ultimately it's not going to serve the purposes of a modern organisation that has all sorts of challenges thrown at it every day, not least in sport. We're always dealing with members, and members can be difficult, fractious, demanding, all sorts of things. So having good governance processes is essential, really, to making sure that the organisation can continue to function, that's got a future, and that is also something that people want to join and contribute to, particularly because most sports boards in NSOs and SSAs are populated, and clubs, of course, are populated by volunteers. So having robust and rigorous governance processes is key to their survival and success. So I think sports governance has evolved, and when I first got involved, which was through rowing, and I was the Secretary General of the Australian Rowing Council as it then was, and I'll just give a couple of examples. So back then, minutes of meetings were basically verbatim accounts. So, he said, she said, pages and pages, whereas now the governance has evolved such that the minutes are not he said, she said. They're succinct summaries. They're kept confidential. When in the olden days, they were distributed to members willy-nilly. So there's, confidentiality wasn't an issue at the time so much and wasn't thought about. And the other thing, particularly for sport, is no longer are most sports, NSO boards particularly, representative. So when I first, again, became involved, sports boards, NSO boards, were populated by the presidents of the state sporting associations, who were inherently and actually conflicted all the time. So they're sitting there with their national hat on, and they're also wearing a state hat, and they have to try and balance which one they're going to be thinking through, when in reality they should just be focusing on the national job while at the national table. So now having more independence and people being able to be elected from the states but having to give up their state hats, for example, is an example of the evolution of governance processes. And as I said, I did this webinar this morning, because it is constant change, constant learning, constantly increasing director obligations that make, knowledge of what you're doing sitting around a board table increasingly important.
Awesome. And so in your time, you've probably seen a lot, and we'll just love to hear, I guess, how you have viewed the changes of, I guess, women and their roles in the sport industry evolve over these years.
Oh, it's a very big question, Alice, and I guess it goes similarly to the fact that women have always been involved in sport and women have been involved in boards and governance for a long time. So, but not in great numbers, I guess is the thing. And I, for example, have had some really interesting and good board roles. I've never thought about it from the point of view, I'm a woman, therefore I should be on this board. I've always tried to think about it through the prism of my skills, experience and what I can bring. But, the blocks and the barriers to women's involvement is probably structural, and it's also probably a result of a lot of women, and I'm sort of loath to say this, but not thinking that they should be there or have the confidence to be there, or are imposters, which is something that I really, really have trouble with, and then don't put themselves forward. And one of the things I guess I have observed too is that in many circumstances, women won't put their hands up if they think they're not going to get appointed or elected. And in a way, if you don't have a go, nothing's going to change. Losing doesn't mean it's about you particularly. It might be that someone else with other skills has been selected. So just having a go, putting yourself in the loop and in the link to be interviewed, test your governance skills against criteria for being on boards, I think is really important, as well as knowing what governance is. And I describe being on a board as having three whammies, triple whammy. So one whammy is when you're first on a board, it takes, certainly in my experience, takes about 6 months to a year to get the hang of who's who. So you can be inducted till you're blue in the face, but it's not actually going to help you understand how people around the table behave, what their biases are, what their attitudes are, what their personalities are. The second one is the business. You can read annual reports and you can, read the organisation's history, their financial reports, whatever. But again, it's going to give you a snapshot, but not that deep insight into that business. So the who's who of what's what and the who's who of the business. And then the third is if you do not know how boards work, then you're at a serious disadvantage because, as I said before, it's not about a management meeting. It's not hierarchical. You don't have a boss telling you what to do. You're not sort of there to play a management. Oh, I've never been employed by anyone. I'm unemployable, so that's a whole other story. But what I know and what I read is, the hierarchy of management meeting is not replicated in board meetings. So you need to understand that. You need to understand the language as well and governance processes. So anyone who's interested in learning how or wanting to be on boards should seriously do some governance training.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Margot, I'm going to throw one out here. I haven't prepared Alice for this.
Okay.
Is sports governance the new sexy term? I mean, 10 years ago, maybe 15, definitely 20, if you had said sports governance and Simone, let's talk about it, I probably would have stopped listening because it's a little bit boring. But I don't feel like that anymore. And I'm not sure if it's the impact of or influence of Steve Pallas, who's very governance focused and I get to hear all the really cool stuff that he's doing in that space. But is it this new sexy thing that more people, irrelevant of any quotas, which we'll come back to later, are wanting to get involved in?
Well, I do a lot of governance training as well because I'm a very happy ex-lawyer And so now I've brought all my skills and experience in the law and sport and all the boards I've been on into doing governance training. Same but different from what Steve's been doing. And yes, people say they want to learn, and then sometimes they get the opportunities and they don't. I think sports governance is a bit of a misnomer because ultimately everybody on a board, whether you are on a state board or a national board, so you've got the State Incorporations Act or you've got the Corporations Act at the Commonwealth level, is subject to director duties just the same. And whilst there might be a sports spin on it, for mine, the broad principles are those that you would talk about and apply in any corporate governance sense. So I think the phrase sports governance is just to try and make it a bit more approachable and a bit less scary, because governance, going back to what we said before, can be a bit of a scary, unknown sort of word. And people go, oh, I'm a dummy, I don't know anything about that. So calling it sports governance and imbuing it with the stories of sport and how sport works, I think is probably one way of getting to the same end. But I certainly wouldn't want anyone thinking that sports governance, when it comes to the pointy end, is any different from corporate governance, because the obligations, duties and responsibilities are just the same.
Yep, great answer. Look, one of the key reasons I wanted to catch up with you, outside of hearing the amazing insights you've already provided, is to talk about the Office for Women in Sport and Rec. And
Yes.
now I wanted to just read a little excerpt from Women's Sport Australia that they put up in the last 24 hours. The Office for Women in Sport and Recreation played a vital role in embedding gender equality into the fabric of Victorian sport, supporting leadership opportunities for women and girls, implementing policy and funding, education and prevention programs to address these issues. Without this office, these cuts threaten the progress made towards safer, more inclusive sporting spaces. Defunding the programs and the OWSR, which are designed to challenge this imbalance, is disastrous. Now, the demise of the Office for Women in Sport and Rec has been, I mean, the feedback's been pretty significant, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts when you heard this news, and maybe talk us through some of the conversations you've had with your connections since that time.
Well, it is very sad and very disappointing that the Office of Women's Sport and Recreation has been defunded. And as has been said, in the terms of the Victorian state government's budget, it is a rounding error. That is, such a small amount to keep such a great program going that it is just shocking. So my conversations are along the lines of the Women's Sport Australia post that you have mentioned, Simone, and everybody is shocked and saddened and stunned, really, that this could happen so readily, so without notice, so without any plan for what might come next. And I guess I take the long-term view of how we've come to this point, and that is going right back to the late 1980s, when the first report into women's sport media was done by a senator, Rosemary. Name just escaped me. And then there was this was a bit before my time, but a women's sport conference, and then I went to the second one, which was in the early 1990s, and which was formed the original version of Women's Sport Australia. And I was a member of that and then became its president. Following on from that, and this is sort of give context to the disappointment and, as you said, for all the work that's been done, is that then in the late 1990s, 1999, I checked something the other day, I decided that I'd set up an equivalent in Victoria, Women's Sport and Recreation Victoria, which sort of supplanted a previous organisation called the Consultative Council on Women in Leisure and Recreation, which was populated by some wonderful women at the time, but they were been around for a while. and that was an advisory council to the state sports minister. So we set up Women's Sport and Recreation Victoria, got some funding, had an employee. That became really difficult, as has been the case in funding women's sport organisations, advocacy organisations for some time. That organisation was then subsumed into Vic Sport for a while before the current government, which has been around now for 10 years, decided it would take positive action to better structure and support women's sport advocacy, which led to the OWSR through an inquiry that was led by Peggy O'Neill and into which I had some input, and which resulted in the office and subsequently the Change Our Game program. So we're going back over 30 years, I guess, if we think about the original Women's Sport Australia and the advocacy and evolution since then. And we got to this really good place, as you described, of so much activity, so much support, so many initiatives that were supporting women in a whole range of circumstances, not least media, change rooms, the initiative to have 40% women on boards, which came in July 2017, I think it was. And so all those little incremental things and helping women here and helping women there and giving them profile over there has just gone. And you think, well, how do we get that back? Can we ever get it back? Because these organisations, despite the best will in the world, cannot exist on the smell of an oily rag. And they're very hard to get funding for independently. The original Women's Sport Australia that I mentioned, it was originally given some funding by the Sports Commission. Then the Sports Commission policy changed. I had to seek private funding, and in the end it became unviable. The current Women's Sport Australia is doing a great job, but has similar challenges. So without the government, and the history of Australian sport is that it does rely on government to a large extent. Without this government support, it's going to be very difficult to extract or have anything rise from those ashes, and it's a setback. And it's not only an actual setback, but it's a psychological setback to say, oh God, here we go again. What will it take? So on the one hand, we have the hype and hoopla about the Matildas, who don't get a medal or a podium at the 2023 World Championships, who bomb out in the Olympics. But they're the sort of the poster girls for women's sport. One might argue why. And yet here we have real resources that made a difference, and supporting all those girls who take up sport because of the Matildas, and that's fantastic. And who might want to get into other areas such as coaching or admin or boards or whatever the case may be. Now, not having those structures in Victoria at least, all those opportunities available to them through what was a very well run program, and had profile and did good things. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question. But how do we get here, and what do we do next? I think are intertwined.
Well, and it was a great answer, even though and it needed to be lengthy, because part of my next question was going to be, well, this is not a decision that's going to impact now and into the short-term future. And it is going to be impactful if something doesn't change quickly. Let's hope it does. But this is work and legacy, Margot, from yourself and many, many other women and men.
Yes.
I've talked to a couple of women in my network who they're devastated about this, because to take this to the level that it was only, up until very recently when we heard this announcement, it has taken blood, sweat and tears. What do you say to, and I mean, how do you feel? Because you're one of those people.
Well, as I say, I am very sad and I'm very disappointed that, as you rightly say too, so many women have put in so many hours, so much effort into all of these initiatives that have led up to the formulation of the office. It is never a straight path to these things, but it's just been trashed. And I think, it's not that, as you can gather, I've seen it all before, but it just seems more particular, more dagger-like at this time, because we are in the midst of this, women's sport era. Despite what I said before, but I think you know what I mean. It's women's sport is a thing, rightly or wrongly, and this abolition really is a blow to that movement, that cause, regardless of whether you think that we should be reinventing it every time somebody a team does well. So yeah, I guess I'm not sanguine. I'm not happy, but given the financial reality of keeping these sorts of organisation afloat and having influence, it's extremely difficult to see what might happen next. And just in parallel, there have been a couple of reports done recently, one into the Matildas' performance and one into cultural issues at rowing. And the reports in both instances are not going to be made public. But there has been some commentary, again, on LinkedIn about what can we do for athletes? What support can athletes get when they are being mistreated, for want of a better word, in their training and selection competition processes? And, there's not a body that does that. Is there going to be a body? Should there be a body? So not just women, but, everybody. But again, it's this, it's finding the resources and the how-to is going to be really challenging for both, whether it's for, the OWSR or for, athletes who've been mistreated during their elite careers.
Yeah. Just to finish up on that one, for those who are watching this, and anyone watching this follows women's sport. We're a women's sport podcast, right? But for those who may not know a lot of the details or the ins and outs of what the office were actually, or what they'd created and what they were actually doing, what do you think the tangible outcomes are, or the tangible impacts that we could see without the office in existence, Margot?
Well, I'm not probably as close to it as you might be, Simone. But they're doing great work with getting more women's voices in sports media, which has always been very blokey, and I think that's been fantastic. They have the quota for women on board, which I know you're coming back to, and I think that's made a change. Not and having women on board for the sake of women, yes, maybe. But it is a different perspective. It's a different background. It's a different experience. It's a different way of thinking that men and women have that I think is really, really key. And there was some pushback and resistance at the time the quota came in, but the world hasn't collapsed, and we're all still here, and sports governance is continuing on. I think probably the biggest challenge for women now is becoming CEOs. I don't know whether the office was going to move on that. I know the Sports Commission's doing work on coaches and getting more women coaches. But CEOs, there are so few women leaders in SSAs and NSOs in particular. So I'm sure that had it continued, there would have been more programs around similar sorts of things. But now that the heavy lifting on that is left to other similar organisations or peak bodies such as Q Sport or Big Sport or whatever, and of course the Sports Commission, which tries to be all things to all people in so many ways, but it too has got finite funding and finite resources.
Yeah.
I think across the board, the niche areas that it was operating in and the local lobbying that it was doing was really important. And, you talk about change rooms, and we're still hearing about women changing in their cars at various places. So, we know the state has no money, so now without the impetus and the pressure from the office, maybe that's just going to grind to a halt too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just quickly, would you be able to talk to us about like the quotas and I guess the direction the government is taking with them? What are your thoughts, I guess, on that?
Personally, I've never been a great fan of quotas for quota's sake. I have come around over time and realised that, change just won't happen by itself and not, So I think that they have worked for good. I'm not sure the Sports Commission is now proposing to start in 2027, I think, 50% men and women, or 50% men and 50% women as defined on boards. And I'm not quite sure that 50-50 is required. I'm sort of happy with 40-20. So yeah, and I think it's here to stay. I think and go back to what I said before, I think having people with different backgrounds, opinions, experiences, and knowledge, men and women, is really important. But clearly, a balance is good, whether it's 40%. So I'm not sure whether it's a great answer, but I think that's where we're at, and I think that it's working pretty well. And certainly, when I joined the board of Motorsport Australia, I was the only woman. I was the only second ever woman on that board, and it was a board of 10. I don't come from a motorsport background, so it was all new to me. And going back to what I said before, at least I understood governance so that I knew what I was getting into by sitting at the table, and then it was up to me to learn about the who's who and the what's what. And since I've joined, we now have a 50-50 board by design and by the processes to encourage women in the motorsport world, in the state councils to put their hands up. And also others have been appointed as well. So that's been a fantastic development and a real example to women who are involved in motorsport. And there's a lot more to motorsport than just driving. That if you're interested in admin and leadership and governance and boards, there is a path.
Just following on from that, great answer too, Margot, but just following on, I've seen you, when I was researching, I've seen you quoted saying, when I hear about quotas, I don't think of myself as a number. I think of myself as someone who has a specific skill and can provide something really specific and knowledge that is required to help an organisation, and particularly from a governance perspective. Is that the advice you would give? There'll be a lot of women listening to this who will be saying, well, I can't go on a board, or I don't want to be on a board just because I'm a woman. Is it that advice that you would provide to them? If you've got the skills, go and get involved.
Well, I've been on lots of boards, and I've been on lots of boards, but not so much now, but in the olden days, where I've been the only woman, and I've never thought about it. I honestly never thought about it. And that might just be a function of me. But going back to when I was talking about rowing Australian Rowing Councils, and also I was the only woman on the board. I think I might have been, can't even remember, but it might have been one or two before me, but didn't occur to me. And it's not as though I don't have, the self-doubt, because we all sort of racked by self-doubt every now and again. I just refuse to think that I'm an imposter. And I think every woman should not think of themselves as an imposter. It's just a shocker of a thing. And everyone's got something to offer. And again, going back to this seminar I did this morning, so I've mentioned now 3 times, but the thrust of it was that you don't need to be a lawyer or an accountant. You can be techie. You can be full bottle on AI, cyber, etc., and you will be in demand. Engineers, for example, are always in demand too because of the way that they think. So if you're creative and curious, and they are the top two things for me if I'm thinking about who could be selected to a board, you're interested, you're prepared to learn, you're prepared to have a say because you're not on a board to sit and say nothing. You don't have to have a view on everything. And if everybody did have a view on everything, you'd have, endlessly long board meetings, which would bore everyone to tears. So it's bringing what you've got. And you don't. And the other thing I'd say too is you don't have to be passionate about a board. So I am, as I said, on the board of Motorsport Australia, and I am there not because I don't come from motorsport, so I'm not passionate about it. And as the dictionary says being passionate is sort of being emotionally unstable. I don't think that's quite the definition, but passion can blind you to opportunities. So my advice whenever I'm asked is I say, find something you are interested enough in. You're not going to be interested in everything, but there will be plenty that you could be interested enough in to put your hand up for. Start small. You're not going to get on a paid board your first gig. Go local, get some experience, do lots of education, governance education. There's so much free stuff. There's what you do, there's what I do in my programs, and learn and give yourself a chance to make a difference. And a lot of women at the moment think, oh, I'm going to get a whole suite of paid boards, and that's really, really hard. It's not something that I have done. I have been sort of happy enough to do my volunteer board work and my real life income earning work as a lawyer initially, and now as a governance specialist. But yeah, so there's plenty of opportunity. And one of the things that I do with the board training that I do particularly for clubs and small organisations is try and make them as attractive as possible by having those good governance procedures so that everybody knows what to expect when they turn up. People know how to work with each other. And so the board is attractive to people who might be wanting to put their hands up and find a spot as well, because the other end of the equation here is succession. And people are always looking around for new people because the current environment generates a fair bit of burnout. And not everybody can stay, nor should they stay, for years and years. So, yeah, I'd have a go. You've got to start somewhere. My first board role was on my boat club board, Melbourne University Boat Club. I didn't really know anything. I was at uni at the time. I was also on the committee at my college at Melbourne Uni. And I started there. And as I said before, we were talking about the minutes and how they used to be sort of verbatim account. Things change all the time. So, you can start now, you can learn what's current, you can find out what the pressure points are, and, find yourself a niche. But certainly don't think of yourself as yourselves as imposters, or it's not, no one will have me, because that's definitely not the case.
Great advice. Hey, we're talking off air. A good friend of mine, Dee Anderson, who you know well also, says to me often, I can't wait for the day when we just talk about sport, when we don't have to say women's sport, men's sport, whatever. And so I'm going to phrase this question to you, because you are quite heavily involved with a number of different hats that you're wearing on any given day. What's next in sport? You're having discussions at the top level in a number of sporting organisations. What's next in sport?
Oh, heavens. Well, first of all, I'd agree with Dee, which sort of goes back to what I said earlier about, we have this sort of reinvention of women's sport, and women's sport is different and separate, when really it's all sport. And just the example of that is, if I may, the Olympic Games. So when you watch the Olympic Games, you are watching sport. You are not watching men's sport, and you're not watching women's sport. And it's one of the only times that we think about sport. And there are women's events and there are men's events. But the cameras are there and they're broadcasting sport. So if we had that all the time, that would be fantastic. I think insofar as sport, it's getting more complicated, it's getting more challenging, it's getting more burdensome, it's getting harder. And part of it, I think, is I did some work recently for an international sports federation and talking to a sort of a global audience. And one of the things I sort of built into my presentations were the Edelman Trust Barometer. And this has been around for 25 years, and it surveys people's level of trust around the world. And they surveyed 33,000 people in 28 countries for their 25th anniversary survey. And they found that people's grievance level is just rising. So people are angry, people are demanding, people are not happy. And I think that, for membership organisations, going back to what I said earlier, the demands of people and the wanting more, the pushback against fee increases, which are inevitable, the need to have a product that has using the language of the moment, sport as a product and a service is going to be probably some of the most challenging things that sport will have to deal with at the non-professional level. I'm particularly talking about, they've got their revenues and whatever. Just the increasing cost of doing business on anything is going to make sport, sport broadly, a tougher place in which to survive and do business and succeed. Having said that, hopefully the impetus from the Brisbane Olympic Games, but a mere 7 years away, they better start building, will help ameliorate some of those challenges and give people still the opportunity to feel that they can be involved in sport. I think just a couple of other things about sport is, the choices that people now have to not be involved in sport. Community isn't what it used to be. Distractions of devices, and we've seen that, more and more studies coming out about how bad that is for kids and young people. And then the other challenge we have is just resources and facilities. And we think about the $1 billion plus that's going to be spent on this Tassie stadium. And you think, well, what else could that money be spent on? What other sports facilities? We also have the cost of maintenance of old facilities such as swimming pools and, run by councils. They're increasingly being shut down because the cost of repair, they're, 50, 60, 70 years old. The cost of repairs is through the roof. And, maintenance, running costs such as, gas is to keep them warm is going through the roof as well. You just have to look at the North Sydney swimming pool, which started being renovated, the one over near Luna Park. The renos commenced in 2018 or 2019, probably just before, sometime around COVID during the pandemic. Anyway, it was estimated to cost X. It's now costing X times 2, X times 2.5. So all those pressures and challenges are going to weigh on sports participation too, and the number of people who play and pay. And are people wanting to play regulated sport? Do they want to just go for a bike ride down Beaconsfield Parade? Do they just want to have a hit of golf on a public course? Do they not want to belong? So all those challenges, I think, to answer your question, there's not just one thing, but a lot, which was why sports organisations need to have those creative, curious and clever people, women among them, on their boards.
Yeah. That was a great answer. All right, Margot, we've loved our chat. We're going to quiz you now.
Oh, goodness, okay.
Off the cuff, throwing a few questions. I'm going to throw the first one. My first question is, tell me your top couple of female leaders in sport that you have either worked with or seen. Who are they?
Oh, I don't have.
Don't have none. Dee will be offended.
I don't know. I don't have any people in any category like that.
Really?
No. I I can never answer this question. If you ask me, you have to edit this out. Yeah. I just don't think like that.
Yeah, love it.
I recognise people for their various skills and whatever.
Yeah.
Our friend Dee, she is fantastic at what she does.
You've redeemed your friendship there. Well done.
And I'd say the same about so many other people in other roles too. But everyone does things slightly differently.
Yeah.
Everyone brings their own selves in different ways, and it doesn't matter what category you ask me about on people. I don't think that. I don't people that I. And this is going to sound a bit self-aggrandizing, but I don't really have people I look up to. I just appreciate most people for what they do, and I'm not critical about people, but yeah. So sorry, that's not a great answer. But
we're not editing that out. That's a great answer. I think that's excellent, and the message to take all the things that people do. And sometimes I like to look at this, that sometimes I take the things people, or I don't like the way people do things, and I take them to help drive the way I would do things. So I love that answer. The next one you have to answer though, and it is, what music do you listen to? Do you have a favourite musician or song or?
Oh well, I'm more a talkback radio person.
Okay, well, what talkback do you listen to? Tell us.
At the moment, I listen to sort of 774 or 3AW mainly. I like talkback, and I've always had it. Yeah. Even since when I was at school studying for my exams, I always had the talkback radio on in the background, and I do that now. Music, what's my favourite album is Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel from way back, and it's got so I play that a lot if the football's on. I don't want to listen to the footy, so.
This is the second interview in a row where I haven't known the answer, like the guest's response. I haven't known who it is. I'll have to Google it. So last time we had a guest.
What was it? Their album or them?
What was the artist? What was Agnes's favourite artist? You weren't here. It was someone very young.
Oh.
Margot, and so you've gone one way and she's gone the other, and I'm just in between.
I know, but I have fairly eclectic taste, so that's my qualifier for that one. And I've got lots of other favourite records too.
I'm going to Google it. My next question is, and then I'll give Alice the mic for a second. If you could have 3 people at dinner and you could choose anyone in the world.
Oh. This is the same answer.
No, it's not, because you can choose a musician, you can choose an athlete, you could choose a president, you could choose anyone.
On top of my head, you should have given me notice on this one. Who would I have? I'm going to take up too much airtime thinking.
No, you're not.
Famous people. All right. So I just say 3 names that come to the top of my head.
Go for it.
All right. So I'm going to say, it's completely random and don't hold me to this, would be Boris Johnson. Who else would I have? I might have Kirsty Coventry.
Mm-hmm.
And you want a third one? Who could that be? Athlete, politician, leader. Volodymyr Zelensky.
Interesting.
Yes.
I love it. I love that answer. Alice.
So when the Olympics are on, which sport are you running to the TV to watch? Is it the rowing or the swimming, or is there any event that particularly sticks out to you, or you just...
Well, I always go to the rowing, obviously.
Yeah.
because I want to see what's going on. And certainly the Olympics just gone and Gay Parry were amazing for the rowing and how the way of rowing 2,000 metres has changed. And then the swimming, I always loved the swimming, and I've actually become quite enamoured of the newer sports. So the skateboarding, the BMX in the rink, and not so much the BMX on the track, and the rock climbing, not the timed one, but the incline wall one.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is so cool to watch.
Yeah.
So fantastic. So and then yes, again a fairly general taste in sport. I'm not a great sport watcher. I listen more than I watch. I'll watch the tennis when it's on. I probably won't watch Olympic tennis, but I'll watch the majors. I'll go to the Australian Open, and also the equestrian. I used to do a bit of riding, not to that level, but I'm always interested in the horses.
Love that.
Margot, footy fan? AFL, NRL?
NRL? Heavens no. I grew up in Melbourne. So I'm not a very rusted on person, but when I'm asked what my football team is, it is St Kilda.
Okay. That's good. Holmesglen have just signed a partnership with St Kilda Football Club to co-deliver their higher education degrees, the first higher education institute to do so. So you've given us a good plug there. I appreciate that. Hey, Margot, it's been brilliant to chat. I could sit and chat with you and pick your brain all day, but I know that we've particularly with some technical issues had you wait around for us, and we're so appreciative. Just to finish off, Alice, in her early 20s, sitting in front of me, about to embark post-graduation on a career in sport, particularly sports media for her. Any words of wisdom for any young females who are about to move into the industry, whether it's in governance or just anywhere?
Just have a crack. The other thing, and I don't know quite how to put this without perhaps sounding censorious, but don't be too precious. Some people say things, they mean it, they don't mean it. Get over it. Don't dwell on it, I guess is the thing. Roll with it. Give as good as you get. Don't take, crap. And I'm sure you won't, Alice. But yeah, I think just be you, and remember that you are as equal to and better than so many other people who you'll be knocking heads with. So I don't know whether that's a great answer, but I guess I think back to me, and if I had bothered to think too much about what some of the things that did happen or didn't happen, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here now.
That's awesome. I love that.
It's a great response. Margot, we would get along well. I'm going to come and catch up with you for coffee at some point.
Well, you're most welcome.
Thank you.
I'm down here in sunny St Kilda.
Oh, a beautiful part of the world. We've loved chatting with you. We thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with everybody. Huge thank you from the Crumbs, and we look forward to catching up again sometime.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, and good luck.
Thanks, Margot.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.